For 2 years, he lived alone. Until one day, a woman arrived to be his wife, and with her came an entire family he never asked for. What begins as a simple arrangement slowly turns into something deeper, something neither of them expected. Welcome to a channel about the Wild West, stories of cowboys, love, family, and the deep compassion that binds people together. Meaning of this story: a house becomes a home not through walls but through people. If you enjoy heartfelt stories, like, comment, share, and subscribe for more. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. Thank you for being part of our community.
The stagecoach groaned to a halt before the Tanapa Junction depot, and across that dusty street, Wyatt Colton felt his heart kick against his ribs. He had not felt that way since he was a greenhorn kid of 18. Now he was 29, a man worn down by the Nevada sun and a deep loneliness. The woman getting off that coach was supposed to be his wife. What he did not count on were the 3 grown men who followed her down. Each one was tall, broad in the shoulder, and covered in trail dust, looking at his small mining town with a mix of wonder and plain doubt. Wyatt pushed himself off the hitching post he had been leaning on for the better part of an hour and walked across the street, his boots stirring up small clouds of white dust. As he got closer, the woman turned, and he found himself staring into the prettiest gray eyes he had ever seen. She was younger than he figured, maybe 23 or 24, with dark blonde hair tucked under a plain bonnet. Her dress was worn, but it was clean and patched with care. "Are you Miss Abigail Fairmont?" he asked, taking off his hat. "Yes," she answered, her voice even though he could see the weariness in her face. "You must be Mr. Colton." "I am." He looked over at the 3 men who now stood close by her side like guards. "I was not expecting you to have company." A little color rose in Abigail's cheeks, but she held her head high. "These are my brothers, Cole, Eli, and Jesse. I wrote to you about them in my last letter." Wyatt frowned, trying to place it. Their letters had been short and to the point. He needed a wife to make a home. She needed a fresh start. The smaller details seemed to get lost along the way. "I do not remember getting that letter. I mailed it 3 weeks ago," Abigail said, a new note of worry in her voice. "I told you that our father died last winter, and we lost our farm to the bank. My brothers have nowhere else to call home. I was hoping there might be some work for them here, or at least a roof over their heads until they found their footing." The oldest brother, Cole, took a step forward. He looked to be about 27, with the same gray eyes as his sister, and a stubborn set to his jaw. "We are not looking for a handout, Mr. Colton. We will earn our keep, and we will be on our way as soon as we have saved up enough to make our own start." Wyatt looked at the 4 of them, tired from the road and clearly down to their last dollar, and he felt a change inside his chest. He had been on that ranch alone for 2 years since his own father passed, trying to work 300 acres and run 200 head of cattle with just the odd bit of help from a passing drifter. The whole place was falling to pieces around him, and he knew it deep down. His own pride was the only thing that kept him from asking for help. But now, here it was, standing right in front of him, with hopeful, tired eyes. "Well, I need ranch hands anyway," he said, the words surprising even himself. "The 3 of you can work for me. I can offer a place to stay and meals and wages when things pick up. Miss Fairmont and I can sort out our own agreement later." The look of relief on Abigail's face was so strong, it made him feel a strange pang of guilt, like he was getting thanks he had not rightly earned. Her brothers seemed to stand a little easier, and the youngest one, who looked no older than 19, broke into a wide grin. "Thank you, Mr. Colton," Abigail said in a quiet voice. "You will not be sorry." He surely hoped she was right. The ranch was 7 miles out of town. It was a handful of weathered buildings tucked into a valley where Cottonwood Creek flowed all year, which was a true gift in the Nevada desert. Wyatt had rented a wagon for the trip, and the 5 of them rode mostly in silence. The Fairmont siblings just looked out at the new country, and Wyatt could not guess what they were thinking. The main house was a solid two-story building his grandfather put up back in 1858, a time when folks hoped Nevada held more than just silver and struggle. The barn was newer, built by Wyatt's father just before he died. There was also a bunkhouse that had sat empty for years, but it was still solid. "Your brothers can have that place," Wyatt said, helping Abigail down from the wagon. "It will need a good sweeping, but the roof is sound." "We have slept in worse spots," Eli said. He was the middle brother, more reserved than the others, with a thoughtful way about him. "We will make it do." Wyatt gave them a quick tour as the sun started to dip behind the western mountains, painting the whole sky in shades of orange and purple that made the desert look like it was on fire. The ranch was in worse condition than he wanted to admit. Fences were down in places. The big barn door was hanging crooked from one hinge, and the patch of ground where his mother once grew vegetables was choked with sagebrush. "There is a lot of work to be done," he said, talking more to himself than to them. "More than enough for all of us." Cole nodded, looking over the land with the keen eye of a man who knew ranching. "We will get started in the morning. Tonight we all need some rest." Wyatt pointed the brothers toward the bunkhouse where they started clearing out 2 years' worth of dust and spider webs. Then he took Abigail inside the main house. He was suddenly sharply aware of just how quiet and empty the place had become. She stood in the main room, her eyes taking in the plain furniture, the fireplace that had not seen a fire in ages, and the feel of a place that missed a woman's touch. "I know it is not much," he said, feeling a need to defend it. "My mother kept it up better, but she has been gone 5 years, and I never found the time or the will." "It will do," Abigail said, her voice heavy with exhaustion. "Mr. Colton, I need to be truthful. I came here to be your wife as we agreed. But with my brothers here now and things being as they are, maybe it would be best if we took some time to get to know one another before making it official." He just looked at her, this woman who had come over 1,000 miles to marry a man she had never met, and he felt both relieved and let down. "That sounds sensible. The extra bedroom is upstairs, the second door on your right. You can have that room, and we can sort out the rest later." She looked him in the eye, and he saw that gratitude again. But there was something else mixed in. She was worn out, for sure, but he also saw a little spark of hope. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. For not sending us away." "I meant what I said," Wyatt told her. "I need the help." He laid in his own bed that first night, listening to the new sounds of other people moving around his house and on his land. It had been a long, long time since he had felt anything but alone, and the difference was both a comfort and a worry. He wondered just what he had signed up for, taking on not just a mail-order bride, but her 3 brothers too. But as he finally fell asleep, he had a thought that maybe, just maybe, this ranch might begin to feel like a real home once more. The brothers showed their value in that first week. Cole had a gift with cattle and horses, a kind of knowing that you just cannot teach a person. He would ride the property, look after the cattle, and fix fences with a focus that Wyatt had to respect. Eli had a real talent for carpentry, fixing everything from the big barn door to the wobbly boards on the porch. Jesse, the youngest, had more energy than a jackrabbit, tackling every chore so hard Wyatt often told him to slow his roll. Meanwhile, Abigail was making the house a home. She scrubbed every floor, polished every window, and took on the kitchen with a grit that was almost fierce. She planted a new vegetable garden, nursed the wild herbs back to life, and made the whole house smell of fresh bread and good cooking. Wyatt started coming inside for meals on a schedule for the first time in 2 years, and sitting at a table with other people felt peculiar, but also right as rain. He and Abigail were careful with one another. They spoke kindly, shared the household duties, and kept a respectful space between them. But Wyatt often caught himself watching her, admiring how she moved through the house when she thought he was not looking. The sound of her laugh when Jessie said something funny, and the way she would stand on the porch in the cool of the evening looking out at the mountains like she was searching for an answer. About 2 weeks after they got there, Wyatt came upon her in the barn one afternoon. She was trying to soothe the mare that a rattlesnake had stirred up. The horse's eyes were wide with fear as she stomped her hooves, but Abigail was talking to her in a low, calm voice, holding her hand out but not quite touching the animal. "Easy now," she whispered. "It is all right. Nobody is going to hurt you." Wyatt waited in the doorway, not wanting to spook either of them. Slowly, bit by bit, the mare began to calm down, her breathing returning to normal until Abigail could finally reach out and gently stroke her neck. When she turned, she saw Wyatt standing there, and a blush crept up her cheeks. "I did not mean to get in the way," she said. "I heard the noise and just wanted to see if I could help." "You have a real touch with horses," he said, walking a little closer. "Where did you learn that?" "From my father," she answered, and a sadness touched her voice. He was good with all the animals when he was not drinking, which was not very often near the end. Wyatt was not sure how to answer that, so he just stayed quiet. They stood there together in the stillness of the barn while the mare nuzzled at Abigail's hand, and he felt a new understanding pass between them. It was not quite trust, not yet, but a new understanding. "My father drank as well," he finally confessed. "After my mother passed, he was riding home one night, fell from his horse and broke his neck." Abigail's gaze met his, her gray eyes filled with a soft sympathy. "I am so sorry." "So am I." He reached out, his hand brushing her shoulder close enough to feel the warmth of her own skin. "We must do what we can with the cards we are dealt." "Yes," she whispered, "we do." That evening, Cole asked to speak with Wyatt alone. They went toward the creek, where cottonwood leaves rustled and the water flowed clear and cool over the rocks. "I need to thank you again," Cole began, "for everything you have done for us." "You all have certainly earned your place," Wyatt said. "Every one of you." Cole paused, his eyes on the moving water. "You should know. Abigail was terrified to come here. She never wanted to leave Kansas, but we had nothing left. Our father had debts with men who do not forgive, and Abigail figured marrying a stranger might keep us safe." A cold knot formed in Wyatt's gut. "Is someone coming after you all?" "I do not believe so," Cole answered. "We settled what we could before leaving, and this distance is our friend, but you deserve to know. Abigail gave up everything for us, and she ought to have a chance at happiness. I hope you can offer her that." "I will do my best," Wyatt promised. And he meant it. As spring blossomed into summer, the ranch flourished like it had not in a long time. The cattle seemed healthier, the pastures were managed better, and the old buildings were finally solid. Eli put up a new chicken coop, and Abigail's dozen hens laid so many eggs they could sell them in town. Jesse had a real talent for taming horses, bringing in extra money from neighboring ranches. Wyatt and Abigail kept up their cautious dance, drawing nearer with each passing day. Their evenings were for talking, sharing tales of their pasts, their sorrows, and their dreams. She spoke of a struggling farm and a father who loved his kids but drank the profits away. He spoke of parents who built a life from nothing in Nevada, only to be taken from him too soon. One warm June night, they sat on the porch alone. The sky was a vast, dark canvas dotted with countless stars, the air still holding the heat of the day. "Do you regret it?" Wyatt finally asked. "Coming all this way?" Abigail thought about it, her profile beautiful in the starlight. "No," she answered. "I was scared to death at first. Scared you would be a mean man or a drunk. Scared you would send us away with nowhere to turn. But you have been a kind man, Wyatt. Kinder than I ever imagined." It was the first time she used his first name, and hearing it from her made his heart race. "You are the one who made this place feel like a home again," he said. "I did not know how much I missed that until y'all arrived." She looked at him, and he saw a familiar hope in her eyes. "What is it we are doing?" she asked, her voice a soft murmur. "We are husband and wife by law, but not in any real way. We are just polite strangers sharing a roof." "I did not want to pressure you," Wyatt explained. "With all you have been through, you deserved a choice in the matter." "And what if I choose you?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He reached for her hand, feeling the rough calluses from her hard work and the simple warmth of her touch. then that would make me the luckiest man in all of Nevada. A true smile lit up her face, chasing the shadows away. I choose you, she said, not out of duty, but because I want to. Because you showed me what a real good man is, and I cannot bear to lose that. Wyatt pulled her to him, and she leaned into his embrace, her head on his shoulder. They stayed like that for a long while under the Nevada sky, and his first kiss was gentle, sweet, and full of promise. Their wedding night a week later was nothing like the awkward duty he had feared. It was tender and full of passion. They were two souls choosing each other against all the odds that brought them together. Abigail was hesitant at first, but his patience won her over. And when they finally came, together as one, it felt as right as a sunrise. Afterward, she lay beside him, tracing idle patterns on his chest. I was so afraid, she confessed, of all this, of you, but you made it a beautiful thing. He kissed her hair, taking in her scent. You are the one who made it easy, he told her. Abigail, I do believe I am falling in love with you. She looked up, her eyes glinting in the lamplight. Just now believing it? She teased him. All right, he chuckled. I am completely and totally falling in love with you. Good, she said, cuddling closer, because I am falling in love with you, too. The summer brought its own set of blessings and burdens. The herd expanded, and Wyatt had to hire 2 more fellas from town. Cole naturally became his right-hand man, handling the day-to-day work so Wyatt could manage the business side of things. Eli repaired every building, and then started on a new barn, one bigger and better than the old. Jesse, who turned 20 that July, began talking about getting his own place, but he did not seem in any real hurry to leave. That August, Abigail learned she was pregnant. She told Wyatt one evening, her face a firm picture of both joy and worry. Are you happy? She asked, studying his face. Wyatt felt as if the air had been knocked from his lungs in the best possible way. Happy? He echoed. Then he pulled her close and spun her around. Abigail, I am more than happy. I am thrilled. Scared spitless, mind you, but thrilled. She laughed, holding on to him tight. I am scared too, but also so excited. I always wanted children, they told her brothers at breakfast the next morning, and the news was met with pure joy. Cole shook Wyatt's hand with real warmth. Eli grinned and promised to build the finest cradle. Jesse let out a whoop that sent the chickens scattering. You're going to be a daddy, Cole said, slapping Wyatt's back. And we are going to be uncles. This deserves a celebration. That evening, they all rode into Tonopah Junction for dinner at the hotel. They toasted the new baby with lemonade, since Abigail could not have anything stronger. For the first time since losing his parents, Wyatt felt like he was part of a real family, a warmth that settled deep in his bones. But as Wyatt knew all too well, good times are often followed by bad. Late in September, a gang of rustlers drove off nearly 50 head of cattle from the north pasture. Wyatt and the Fairmont boys tracked them for 2 hard days across the desert with little more than jerky and water. They finally cornered the thieves at an old mining camp. The fight was quick and nasty. Cole caught a bullet in his shoulder, and Jesse was nearly brained with a rifle butt. But they got the rustlers tied up and delivered to the sheriff. They recovered the cattle, though they had to hire a driver to help get them all back to the ranch. Abigail was beside herself when they got home, a mix of pure relief and white-hot anger at their carelessness. She fussed over Cole's wound after the town doctor had patched it up, and she lit into all of them for their recklessness. You could have all been killed, she said, her voice trembling. And what for? For our livelihood, Wyatt told her gently. For the future of this ranch. For our baby. I know you were scared, and I am sorry. But I cannot let men steal from us and get away with it. I know, she cried, tears streaming down her face. But I need you, Wyatt. We need you. Do not take such foolish chances. I promise to be more careful, he vowed, holding her tight. I have far too much to live for these days. Cole healed up just fine, and by October he was back to his old self. That run-in with the rustlers had forged a new bond between them all, a shared sense of purpose, They were not just a rancher and a mail-order bride with her brothers anymore. They were family, tied by blood, choice, and the tough work of making a life in a tough country. Winter arrived early that year, dusting the mountains with snow. Abigail's pregnancy moved along, and she grew larger and more uncomfortable, but she did not once complain. She filled her days getting ready for the baby, stitching little outfits and turning a spare room into a nursery. Eli built a gorgeous pine cradle with horses carved on it, and Wyatt ordered a new rocking chair from town. On a bitter cold night in late January of 1876, Abigail's time came. Wyatt sent Jesse to fetch the midwife at a full gallop while he, Cole, and Eli tried to keep her calm. The midwife, a no-nonsense woman named Mrs. Patterson, showed up an hour later and took complete control, her hands on her apron. "You have a son," she said, her stern face softening into something like a smile. "A healthy boy, and your wife is doing fine. You can go in now." Wyatt climbed the stairs on shaking legs and entered the bedroom. Abigail was propped up on pillows, exhausted but glowing, and in her arms was a tiny, red-faced infant wrapped in a blanket. She looked up as he approached, and the love in her eyes nearly brought him to his knees. "Meet your son," she said softly. Wyatt reached out with trembling hands and took the baby, who weighed almost nothing and yet felt like the entire world. The infant's eyes were squeezed shut, her hands on her apron. "You have a son," she said, her stern face softening into something like a smile. "A healthy boy, and your wife is doing fine. You can go in now." Wyatt climbed the stairs on shaking legs and entered the bedroom. Abigail was propped up on pillows, exhausted but glowing, and in her arms was a tiny, red-faced infant wrapped in a blanket. She looked up as he approached, and the love in her eyes nearly brought him to his knees. "Meet your son," she said softly. Wyatt reached out with trembling hands and took the baby, who weighed almost nothing and yet felt like the entire world. The infant's eyes were squeezed shut, and he had a shock of dark hair that stuck up in all directions. Wyatt felt something break open in his chest, something huge and overwhelming and perfect. "He is beautiful," he whispered. "Abigail, he is perfect. I want to name him Ezra," she said. "After my grandfather, he was a good man, and I want our son to have a good name." "Ezra Kalulton," Wyatt said, testing the sound of it. "I like it." Her brothers crowded into the doorway, and Wyatt carefully passed the baby to Cole, who looked down at his nephew with wonder. "Welcome to the family, Ezra," Cole said. "We are going to teach you everything we know." "God help him," Eli said. But he was smiling. The winter passed in a blur of sleepless nights and early mornings, of learning how to care for an infant and keeping the ranch running at the same time. Ezra was a good baby, crying only when he was hungry or needed changing, and Abigail navigated motherhood with the same quiet competence she brought to everything else. Wyatt found himself falling even more deeply in love with her, watching her sing to their son, seeing the way her face lit up when Ezra smiled for the first time. Spring brought new life to the ranch. The cattle calved successfully, the garden burst into bloom, and Ezra grew plump and healthy. Cole had become indispensable, running the ranch operations with an authority that Wyatt trusted completely. Eli finished the new barn, and Jesse started talking seriously about striking out on his own, though he had not yet made any definite plans. One evening in May, Wyatt found Cole sitting on the corral fence, watching the horses. There was something contemplative in his expression, and Wyatt climbed up to sit beside him. "Something on your mind?" Wyatt asked. Cole was quiet for a moment. "I have been thinking," he said finally, "about staying here permanently, not just as a ranch hand, but as a partner. I have saved some money and I could help expand the operation." Wyatt considered this. "You want to be a partner in the Colton Ranch?" "I do," Cole said, "if you will have me. This place feels like home, Wyatt, more than anywhere I have ever been, and I think we could build something great here together." Wyatt felt a swell of emotion. He had come to think of Cole as more than an employee, more than even a brother-in-law. He was a friend, a confidant, someone Wyatt trusted with his life and his livelihood. "I would be honored," he said. "We will draw up papers, make it official, equal partners." Cole extended his hand, and they shook on it, sealing the agreement. "Thank you, Cole," said, "for everything, for giving us a chance when we had nothing." "You earned it," Wyatt replied. "All of you." That summer, they expanded the ranch, buying more land from a neighbor who was retiring and moving back east. The cattle herd grew to 400 head, and they hired 3 more hands to help manage the workload. Eli decided to stay on as well, less interested in partnership than in having a place where he could ply his trade and be near his family. Jesse, however, announced in August that he had been offered a job as a deputy sheriff in Tonopah Junction, and he was going to take it. "I am not meant for ranching," he said somewhat apologetically. "I love it here, and I love all of you, but I need something different, something that keeps me moving." Abigail hugged him tightly, tears in her eyes. "Just promise you will visit," she said, "and be careful. The world is dangerous." "I promise," Jesse said, hugging her back. "And you have given me a home to come back to, which is more than I ever thought I would have." He left a week later, riding off toward town with his bedroll and saddle and a grin on his face. Wyatt watched him go and felt a pain of loss, but also pride. Jesse was making his own way, and that was as it should be. The years that followed were full and rich. Ezra grew from a baby into a toddler, running around the ranch on sturdy legs and getting into everything. Abigail became pregnant again in 1877, and this time she gave birth to a daughter they named Clara. Then came another son, Jacob, in 1879, and finally another daughter, Rose, in 1881. The ranch prospered. Wyatt and Cole expanded the operation, buying more land and increasing the herd. Eli built additional structures, including a proper schoolhouse where Abigail taught their children and the children of neighboring ranchers. Jesse visited often, bringing stories of his adventures as a lawman and spoiling his nieces and nephews with peppermint sticks from the general store. Tonopah Junction grew as well, transforming from a rough mining town into a proper community with a church, a school, and even a newspaper. Wyatt served on the town council, helping to establish law and order, while Abigail organized social events and fundraisers for the church. Through it all, their love deepened. Wyatt never stopped marveling at the woman who had come to him as a mail-order bride and become the center of his world. She was his partner in every sense, sharing the work and the decisions, raising their children with wisdom and grace, standing beside him through drought and hardship, and the 100 small challenges that came with running a ranch. On their 10th wedding anniversary in the summer of 1886, Wyatt took Abigail on a trip to Carson City, leaving the children in the capable hands of Cole and Eli. They stayed in a fine hotel, attended the theater, and walked through the streets like a courting couple. "Do you remember when I first arrived?" Abigail asked as they strolled along the boardwalk one evening. "How scared I was. How uncertain I remember," Wyatt said, taking her hand. "I was pretty scared myself. I thought I was getting a wife, and instead I got a whole family." "Are you sorry?" she asked, though her tone was teasing. "Not for a single moment," he said seriously. "You gave me everything, Abigail. A home, a family, a reason to keep going. I was just surviving before you came. You taught me how to live." She stopped walking and turned to face him, her eyes bright with tears. "You saved us," she said. "Me and my brothers. We had nothing, nowhere to go, and you took us in. You gave us a chance to build something. Everything we have, everything we are. It is because you opened your heart and your home." "We saved each other," Wyatt said, and kissed her there on the boardwalk, not caring who saw. They returned to the ranch to find that Cole had gotten engaged to the school teacher who had taken over when Abigail stopped teaching to focus on the younger children. Her name was Margaret, and she was a sensible, kind woman who fit into the family as though she had always been there. They married in the fall, and Cole built a house on the eastern edge of the property, close enough to be part of the ranch, but far enough to have their own space. Eli surprised everyone by courting and marrying the daughter of the livery stable owner in Tonopah Junction. Her name was Alice, and she was a tiny, fierce woman who matched Eli's quiet strength with her own determined spirit. They settled in a house in town, and Eli split his time between his carpentry business and helping out at the ranch. Jesse, true to his restless nature, never married, but he became the sheriff of Tonopah Junction and was beloved by the community for his fair-mindedness and his quick draw. He was a fixture at Sunday dinners at the ranch, always ready with a story or a joke, always spoiling his growing number of nieces and nephews. The children grew. Ezra inherited his father's love of the land and his mother's practical wisdom. Clara was spirited and clever, always asking questions and reading every book she could get her hands on. Jacob was gentle and dreamy with a talent for music that Abigail nurtured by buying him a fiddle. Rose was the baby, adored by everyone, with a sunny disposition that could brighten the darkest day. Wyatt watched his family grow and thrive, and he felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. On quiet evenings, when the work was done and the children were asleep, he would sit on the porch with Abigail, holding her hand and looking out at the land they had built together. "You ever think about how different things could have been?" Abigail asked one such evening. It was 1890, and 14 years had passed since their wedding day. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't come, if you'd turned my brothers away," Wyatt confessed. "And every single day I thank the good Lord it all happened just the way it did. You are the finest thing that ever happened to me, Abigail. You and this life we've made." She rested her head on his shoulder. "I used to dream about this, you know," she said softly. "Back when I was just a girl on a wore-out farm with a father lost to the bottle. I'd dream of my own place, a happy family, and a man who truly loved me. And it all came true, just not how I pictured." "You made it happen," Wyatt told her, "with that grit and spirit of yours. You took a huge gamble coming out here to marry a man you'd never met, and you built it into something beautiful." They sat together in a comfortable quiet as the sun dipped behind the mountains, painting the sky in fiery colors. The sounds of their ranch filled the air, the lowing of cattle, the nicker of a horse, and the far-off sound of their children laughing in the barn. In 1892, Ezra turned 16 and started pulling more weight on the ranch, working beside his father and uncle with a seriousness that made him seem older. Clara, at 14, declared she was going to be a teacher just like her mama and her Aunt Margaret. Jacob, at 13, was happy just tending to the animals and playing his fiddle on the porch at night. And Rose, only 11, was already shaping up to be a horsewoman who could give her mother a run for her money. Cole and Margaret had 3 little ones of their own by that time, filling the ranch with happy noise. Sunday dinners needed 2 long tables to hold everybody. And holidays were loud, joyful messes with more food and folks than you could count. Wyatt and Abigail grew old side by side, their hair turning to silver, their faces mapping the years, but their love never wavered. It only got stronger, settled deeper by all they had shared, and the respect they had for one another. They knew each other's every mood, could speak without a word, and moved through their days like a slow, familiar dance. In 1895, Ezra married the daughter of a neighboring rancher. Wyatt and Abigail became grandparents the next year when their grandson, Wyatt Jr., was born. Holding that little fella, Wyatt felt the same powerful wave of love he'd felt for Ezra, and he knew deep in his bones that this was what it was all about. It was about family carrying on, passing down love and lessons from one generation to the next. Clara went off to school in Carson City and came right back to Tonopah Junction to teach, just as she'd vowed. Jacob married a nice girl from town and opened up a music shop selling instruments and giving lessons. Rose took charge of training the horses, growing it into a real business that brought people from all over Nevada. Jesse stayed on as sheriff until 1898, when he was hurt during a shootout with some fellas robbing the bank. He got better, but a lasting limp made him hang up his badge for good. He moved back to the ranch and took over the books, proving he was just as sharp with numbers as he'd once been with a pistol. Cole and Wyatt kept running the ranch together, their bond as solid in their 60s as it was the day they first struck their deal. They made it through dry spells and hard winters, bad markets, and even a bit of cattle sickness. They always pulled through because they had each other and the family they had raised. Eli got a reputation as the best carpenter in the whole territory. His handiwork was wanted all across Nevada. He and Alice raised 5 children, who all got their daddy's knack with wood and their mama's stubborn will. The family get-togethers got bigger with each passing year, and the Colton Ranch was known far and wide as a welcoming place. As the new century began, Wyatt often found himself thinking about the long road that brought him here. He was 69 years old, his body showing the signs of a long, hard life. But his heart was at peace. He had built something that would last, something decent, and he had done it all with the woman he loved right beside him. On a warm June evening in 1900, Wyatt and Abigail celebrated their 24th anniversary. All their children and grandchildren came to the ranch for a celebration that stretched late into the night. There was fiddling and dancing, too much good food, and the kind of pure happiness that only comes from being with your people. Later on, after the party had quieted down and everyone had found a place to sleep, Wyatt and Abigail strolled down to the creek, a walk they had taken more times than they could count. The cottonwood leaves whispered in the wind, the water tumbled over the smooth stones, and the stars blanketed the sky above. 24 years, Abigail said, lacing her fingers with his. Sometimes it feels like forever, and other times like yesterday. I'd do it all over again, Wyatt said. Every single bit of it, the hard times and the good, just as long as I could do it with you. She smiled, her face still the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Do you remember what you said to me on that first day? When you saw my brothers and knew I hadn't come by myself. I said I could always use more ranch hands, Wyatt said, a smile in his voice. And you could, Abigail replied, but you needed more than that. You needed a family, and we surely needed a home, and somehow, against all the odds, we found each other. Best decision I ever made, Wyatt said. Not sending you away, taking a chance on all of y'all. The very best. Abigail countered, getting on that stagecoach, trusting there was something better waiting for me down the road. They stood there in the quiet dark, holding each other, and a deep sense of gratitude washed over Wyatt. Life hadn't been a cakewalk, but Lord, it had been good. He had loved and been loved, built something real, and raised children who would carry on his name. What more could any man ever ask for? The years kept rolling on, the way they always do. Wyatt and Abigail got older, their steps a little slower, spending more of their days sitting on the porch, watching the world go by. But they were never lonely, never set aside. Their children and grandchildren came by often, and the ranch kept on prospering under Ezra's hand and Cole's watch. In 1905, Abigail took sick. It began with a nagging cough, and no matter what the doctor tried, it settled deep in her lungs. Wyatt stayed by her bed day and night, holding her hand, telling her stories about their life together, refusing to give up hope. But in the end, not even love could stop the clock. On a cold February night, with all her family around her, Abigail Colton passed on at the age of 54. Wyatt held her as she drew her last breath, and he felt like a piece of his own heart had been ripped right out. They laid her to rest on a hill that looked out over the ranch, beneath a big cottonwood tree she had always loved. The entire town came to say goodbye, a testament to the woman she was. Wyatt stood by the grave, held up by his children and brothers, and he mourned with a sorrow so deep it shook him to his core. In the weeks that followed, Wyatt was just plain lost. The ranch felt hollow without Abigail. The house was too quiet. He went about his days, but the light inside him had gone out. It was Cole who finally came and pulled him from the shadows. He strode into the house one morning, marched right into Wyatt's room, and threw open the curtains. "That's enough," Cole said, his voice firm. "Abigail wouldn't want you to just fade away. She'd want you to live, to be with your family, to enjoy the time you've got left." "I don't know how," Wyatt said, his voice broken. "She was my everything." "She was," Cole agreed. "And she loved you with all she had. So you honor that. You honor her memory by living the way she'd want you to." It was not easy, but little by little, Wyatt started to mend. He spent his days with his grandkids, teaching them about the ranch. He sat on the porch with Jesse, sharing old stories while the sun went down. He worked alongside Ezra, passing down a lifetime of wisdom. He'd visit Eli and Alice in town, admiring the newest thing Eli had built. And every single evening he'd walk up the hill to Abigail's grave and talk to her, telling her about his day, the family, and the life they had made together. It gave him peace, and slowly, the sharp pain of his loss softened into something he could carry. Wyatt Colton lived 5 more years after Abigail passed, and they were good years, despite the ache of her absence. He saw more grandchildren come into the world, watched his own children create their legacies, and felt a deep pride that the ranch would carry on. One warm August afternoon in 1910, Wyatt sat on the porch with Ezra, watching the little ones play. He was 79 years old, his body tired from a life of hard work, but his mind was as clear as ever. "You've done a fine job," Wyatt told his son. "This place is in good hands." "I learned from the best," Ezra said, his voice a little thick. Wyatt smiled. "Your mother taught me everything that ever mattered. How to love, how to raise a family, how to make a house a home. Before her, I was just a lonely man on a big piece of land. Came along. She made me the man I became." "She loved you dearly," Ezra said. "I know," Wyatt replied. "And I loved her. I still do. I will love her until my dying day and beyond." That evening, Wyatt went to bed with a peaceful heart. He dreamed of Abigail, as young and pretty as the day she stepped off that stagecoach in Tonopah Junction. And when he woke up, he was standing right there beside her once more. They found him the next day, resting peacefully in his bed with a faint smile on his lips. He was laid to rest beside Abigail on the hill under the cottonwood, and the whole town mourned the loss of a man who was a cornerstone of their community. But the legacy of Wyatt and Abigail Colton was just getting started. The ranch continued to do well, passing down from one generation to the next. Their children and grandchildren spread out all over Nevada and farther, carrying with them the values that had been planted deep inside them. And on quiet nights, folks used to say that you could still see them, a lonesome rancher and his mail-order bride who had arrived with 3 brothers, walking hand in hand across the land they had built together. Their love was timeless and strong. Their story became a legend in Tonopah Junction. It was passed down as a lesson in how courage, kindness, and taking a chance on someone could change your whole life. They had started out with only hope and grit, and from that they built a family that would last forever. Cole lived to be 82, passing away in his sleep in 1918 with his family around him. Eli made it to 85, still making beautiful furniture until his hands grew too stiff to work. Jesse, the youngest of the Fairmont brothers, outlived them all, passing at the age of 90 in 1927, still telling tales about the old days and the bride who saved them all. The ranch stayed in the Colton family for generations, a monument to the love and hard work of the couple who founded it. And every year on Wyatt and Abigail's anniversary, the family would gather at the graves on the hill and tell the story of a lonely rancher who needed a wife, a desperate woman with 3 brothers, and the simple words that changed everything. "I need ranch hands anyway." It had been the start of everything. The beginning of a family, a legacy, and a love story that would be told for years to come. It reminded anyone who heard it that the greatest gifts often come from where you least expect, and that an open heart can lead to a joy that lasts a lifetime. The sun set over the Nevada desert, coloring the sky gold and red, just as it had that first night when 5 strangers became a family. And in the whisper of the wind through the trees, You could still hear the echo of their laughter, feel the warmth of their love, and the promise that some bonds, some families, are truly meant to last forever.